Dan Steeves in the house, and Dan, as soon as you walked in, the number 14 came up, because it seems like that's how many years it's been since you've last been here at Station Gallery.
Wow.
And you had an exhibition here. It's called Tantrum or Gothic.
Yes, yes. And I was just relaying to my wife in the car before we came in that I can remember being in this room and you were having me do a bit of a walking tour of the images on the wall. And two women walked into the space, and I was mid-sentence, and I stopped, and I said, I'm sorry, I apologize, but I have to go speak to these two women. And they were classmates of mine that I hadn't seen since graduation at Mount Allison. And so one of them just emailed me the other day and said, we just moved back. She grew up in Charlottetown, spent all of her married life, working life here in Toronto, and they've just moved home. So she said, I'm so sorry I won't be able to walk in on your opening and surprise you. So anyway, so that brings back nice memories of being here.
And I remember that we also had the boxcar print studio here on site, and you did, there was sort of a revitalization of our print workshops, and you did I'm recalling the workshop was called An Afternoon with Dan. We had, so you went through the many stages involved in creating, and we still have those prints preserved in our collection, in our archives, ones that you pulled here on site. And every year you're very generous, supporting the annual signature fundraiser, Drawing for Art. There's always a Dan Steeves in the mix, and of course we have this lovely piece that's behind us. It would feel like pure cowardice to pull out now, from 2008, an etching, which you very generously donated to our permanent collection back in 09. And I just love it because there's a nice overlap with the heritage of how our heritage building got onto a new site, and it's very similar to that moment. And as I'm recalling, it was something that happened on the campus of Mount Allison, where you taught.
Just up the street, up on York Street. I'd heard that they were going to move this house, and I had done several images of houses jacked up and that kind of thing, and I'd never seen a house actually being moved. So I spent the day just watching them moving it inch by inch, foot by foot, and they moved it down the street probably, I don't know, probably 1,000 yards or something to a new site. And we were speaking about Stanley Royal, and I think this was a house that he had lived in at one point when he was teaching at Mount Allison. So, of course, this isn't our street. This is Opal Rocks, which is on the Bay of Fundy, and these majestic rocks that rise out of the bay, carved by the tide that comes in twice a day, and the flower pot rocks. It's kind of the postcard kind of picture image for New Brunswick. And so I kind of thought, wouldn't it be an interesting place to place this truck in this house? Because the navigation of that would not be an easy thing. The mud, of course, the truck and the house would be sinking into the mud as they were trying to move it. And I know that when they moved this house, they actually had the New Brunswick Power Commission and two private companies that had to move, lift wires and that kind of thing, disconnect wires to be able to get this house just down the street. And so I always kind of viewed it as not an easy thing. Mm-hmm. And of course, this is a metaphor for life and kind of the passage of moving through life, and how that's not always an easy thing.
Now, what brings you to town?
Well, after 2 misses, so in 2020 I was to have a solo show at the Abotso Gallery, and then in 2021, and so now we're kind of a bit better place in terms of the pandemic. We're having a solo show of now 2 bodies of work. So the body One Step Closer to Knowing, which was supposedly the original show, and then a new body that goes with it, or is being paired with it, called The Waiting Game, which was the work that I did during COVID, actually.
Oh, I look forward to seeing that. The initial suite that you've mentioned, you've very generously donated an addition to our permanent collection. It's one of the largest donations to the gallery in our over 50-year history. And we'll be having a look at some of those images that we have here on site. Can you put it into a context? What was the genesis of that body of work?
Well, it was the summer of 2016. I had read about the Olsen house in Cushing, Maine, and got thinking about that house. And we have another very good friends who we travel with quite a bit, and I was talking about it with them. And they said, well, why don't we go on a road trip to Cushing? And so we did that. We drove down to Cushing, Maine, and the Olsen house is a National Historic Site now. And it is the house that Andrew Wyeth made famous by the painting Christina's World.
Right, yes. Painted in 1948.
In 1948. And I had first seen that painting in the spring of 1978 in New York City when I was a student, an art student. And I had gone and looked at that painting and was quite enamored with it, and the figure of the female figure lying on the lawn looking up at this house way up on a hill, and went away and looked at other work it was in the Museum of Modern Art, and was looking at the rest of their collection, came back to it before we left and started looking a little closer, and was quite shocked to realize that this wasn't a young woman, but that the arms were skin on bone arms, and the hands were all gnarled and disfigured. And I realized that something else was going on. And I'd like to think that that painting taught me how to look at art, or the beginning of it. Even though I had been a student that year, I really felt like, okay, I have a responsibility as a viewer to actually look and see. And so I started doing some research on that painting. And of course, at that time, as a student at Mount Allison University, Wyeth was reviled, because he was a realist. And no one thought that his work should be kind of considered in the canon of art, at least at that moment. But I just had a real inkling. I felt he was a very strong painter, and also that there was something else in his work that was going on. So we went to the house.
This is the Olsen house.
The Olsen house in Cushing. And the woman, it was the last tour of the day. There were supposed to be 45-minute tours, and she gave us a 2-hour tour. And she had grown up in Cushing. She had grown up around that house, and the stories that she told about the Olsen family. And of course, Christina had a kind of an MS type of disease that in the end made it so that she couldn't walk. And so she literally had to crawl outside or even inside the house. And so the stories that the docent told us about, you know, how things ended up for Christina and her brother. They lived together in this house. And at that point, it had started to not be in good condition. At the time, Wyeth was really criticized for doing paintings and selling them and making a profit off of this,
Right.
these siblings. But what the press didn't understand was that he tried to help. One is of you have in your drawing for art the back end of a car
Yes.
stuffed into a tree from Pacific Rim National Park. And that same car, but it's the other way. It's a car I took photographs of in New Brunswick, Shediac. It's lifted up on a rack, and the rack is kind of held up in the air. And there's a figure, Eric Edson, that teaches print at Mount Allison with me. He's applauding, and it kind of comes from this. We had when we built the building, and we wanted a rack made that would hang from the ceiling that would hold all the silk screens. And when the guy was finished, when he was finished welding, he said, "You could hang a car off that rack." And I thought, that's it, I'm going to hang a car off that rack. And so this car is kind of over the ocean of Prince Edward Island, the north shore of the Atlantic Ocean of Prince Edward Island. And so all these things are just kind of come together. And again, I'm not quite sure what they're all about. But it'll as the series progresses, that will come.
Well, thanks for sharing the stories, narratives, anecdotes behind your studio practice, Dan. It was, I think, very valuable and very enriching. I think we're all richer for having seen this interview. So thank you, and good luck with your exhibition at the Obozo Gallery this evening.
Thank you so much. Great being back here.
Thank you.
So the hunger for recognition, I mean, all my titles, or about 95% of my titles, come from a collaboration that I've had with another friend, Mark Harris. And Mark has written me letters for over 25 years. And very metaphoric writer. And so from the letters, I circle text that seems to be about what I'm thinking about, and then those become the titles for the prints. So that's why in some of them there may be a lowercase letter at the beginning.
This is, you had mentioned that there's a descent.
Yeah, this one's a descent, like going down a space. It's leaving a mark on me. So it looks like he's carrying something on his back. He's just actually
For this, to pull it now, what is a bonetier?
Bonetier.
Bonetier.
That's French for right to pull or right to print. So often, if you were collaborating and I was the artist, you were the printer, we print a bonetier, and I go, yes, I sign it, make them all look like this. And so there's only one copy of that. So some feel it's worth more. But there's not always a bonetier. Sometimes I just go right into the edition. It just kind of depends on the edition. So if there's 16, there's no artist proofs. If it's 14, that means that there are two prints that become what I call trial proofs, TP, and I number them 1.2, 2.2. And that's all there are. So a trial is, I tried to print it, make it look the same, it didn't work out. So it can't be part of the edition, it can't be a bonetier, it can't be an artist proof, because an artist proof is supposed to be about 10% of the edition. Really is what it's supposed to be. So.
The recoats. And I just love that gutsy black darkness right in here.
Yeah, that was something I wasn't sure if I was going to do, and Eric that I work with said, no, this is key, just so minimal. And so the Lisa's looking out. This is the bay of funding up here. This is my son-in-law, who's a carpenter, and I kind of likened it to when I had my studio built. A young man would borrow a tool from the carpenter came one day, and he said, if you let me borrow the tool, whatever it was, I can't remember, he said, I'll work for you for the day, I'll give you a day's labor. And so he stood up on the peak of the roof, which is, we live in a 1.5-story house, Cape Cod house, and this garage and studio are to the side of it. And he's standing on the peak, and he said, I can see the Bay of Fundy from here. And I'm thinking, I'd fall off the roof if I stood up like that. So I've always admired individuals that have that sense of balance, but that ability to see beyond. So there's a lot I don't know, which ends up the title One Step Closer to Knowing comes from the auditioning process and listening to YouTube. So I can't listen to music that kind of is soft and mellow and kind of slows me down. I have to have kind of the agitated, like the guitar of YouTube. And they've got that. There was a song, and being a printmaker, repetition is important. And that song, One Step Closer to Knowing, each time I was doing one of these editions was playing. I thought, that's it. That's what the name of this series needs to be. Because I had a different title for it before. I changed it to that.
Maybe we'll
mentioned that there was a matrimonial moment in some of these. Is that coming through here?
Yes, so a new depth of richness. This is actually from my daughter and son-in-law, their first dance. And outside there's this looks like a circus tent, but it's a tent that we had the reception in and the dance after. And that was in New Brunswick, of course. This is an Olson House in Cushing, Maine. There's this nice little tower thing going on, which I didn't attend, it just appeared, but I did lighten it a bit. And then this figure kind of disassociated, doesn't know what's going on, or doesn't give any homage to what's going on.
Once again, we have descent. In this case, it's a female figure descending one of the staircases at the
So,
Olson House.
yeah, again, Lisa, my wife, but it's this moment, her hand's not quite on the railing. It's just above it, so it's in between steps. The lines can get blurred, you know, there's that sense of what is she going into? It's a lightened space.
Walk towards the light.
Yeah, a hopeful space, but yet, to me, the fact that she's not holding on, kind of there's freedom in that, but there's also danger in that.
Portrait, a profile of Lisa.
Yes.
And there's what would you call it? The stained glass windows, maybe.
So this is actually from Sackville. This is there's a huge United Church, a wooden structure, and the congregation had diminished enough that it couldn't keep the repair up, and so the time came that it had to be torn down. And the person that bought the land gave them another building that they could have for their church, which was a great trade. But Lisa is a musician, pianist, and also took organ her last year at Mount A. So she played, when we first were married in Sackville, she played 6 weeks filling in at the United Church. Wow. And so I went and took photographs the day they were tearing down the structure, and that rose window was so beautiful. And so I kind of imagined it exploding, and so the bits are kind of flying everywhere. And Lisa's kind of either watching or a bit oblivious to it, I'm not sure which. And then the debris of the destruction of the building is below.
This one I felt like it's an anomaly.
It is an anomaly. But yet, I felt there was a link between outside, inside, searching for something. And so this is, again, figure of Greg in shorts. He's actually on a bit of a wharf in Venice when we were in Italy. And then this is Silver Lake, my hometown where we live in Sackville. And this was the first time we ever skated. We've lived in Sackville all of our married lives, and we've only ever skated on the lake once. And part of that is, as a boy, one of my classmates skated on a river in Riverview where I grew up and fell through an air pocket and drowned. And so I was always a bit, water in me, I'm always a bit tentative. And as we skated, all these cracks, they hear the popping, and they say it's just the air underneath, but it's not like it's going to break apart.
Mm-hmm.
And we were assured. And then they told us about a fire on the lake, that they have bonfires on the lake. I think, well, if you have a bonfire, doesn't that burn a hole and everything falls into the water? They said no. It melts and makes more ice. And so it's that almost like, I don't know if you know the term entropy. So chemical entropy is the degradation of, like, a tree falls and it rots, goes back into the soil and then recreates, and it's kind of that type of thing. So it often feels like enough. But I mean, a good observation that it's kind of an outlier print, but I still felt I wanted to include it.
Oh, yes.
So this is one in an unusually full season. So.
And this is your son's?
This is our son's dog, Panda, kind of one of our favorites, and the dog, that is. And our daughter, Alicia, who is a gardener and at that time was growing flowers. But I wanted to depict the empty bucket, and like I say, after the print was made, she announces that, or I was working on the print, that she's pregnant. And I said, that's the news, that's the baby in the bucket
Right.
that maybe Lisa is looking for in the closet.
Chalk here, right?
Yes.
Is that what it's referred to? It's really hard to, it's very subtle. Depends if the light hits it. And that would be of the chalk that's used for prints that are created at Mount Alice.
No, that's my chop.
That's your chalk.
That's a personal chop. So it's a stylized S and a backward D, so it's a flame.
Yeah.
And so to have a printer's shop, you have to be considered a master printer. So someone has to give you that designation. So I don't have that designation, but I have an artist shop. So everything that I do in print form has that. It's just like a lawyer's seal. And just it gives it authenticity, it shows it's part of the edition, and so on. So this is the actual Olsen house from the outside. So you see this beautiful, beautiful house, my stars. Just proportionately, the proportions of the windows and the dormers on the roof. And then of course there's what they call a summer kitchen, and then a wood shed that will be built on it. So this is my son-in-law. This is Yarrow, the one-eyed dog, friends of theirs. Dog, and so he's calling, but is he calling to this figure, or is he calling to the dog? This figure continues to be walking, this dog is seemingly not moving, natural, unforced confidence. I often like that triad of things or objects or people or situations going on within the work.
I love the tumultuous mark making both in the land and in the sky as well.
So the way I work is with that lithographic touche, so I'm able to paint it like a watercolor. I paint it negative, so anything that's white or light becomes black. Anything that's black, it just has a little bit of grease so the acid can bite through. So it's you're constantly, you gotta think, a reverse image, because on the plate, this figure would be on this side, the dog would be over here, but then you also have to think of, think in your mind like a negative. And just try to complicate things for myself. This is a man from Italy playing the accordion. These are my father-in-law's pants that used to hang over the railing at their house. He worked in the woods a lot. He'd come home and change his clothes or have a shower and hang his pants. I think much to Lisa's mom's dismay over the railing. Maybe the kind of the smell of the chainsaw sometimes on them or that type of thing. But the figure down here, Lisa, is kind of drawn to the sound. And her dad, when he could, loved to play the guitar. Music was always a part of their house. So here's a good example where there's 14.
Right.
So there's 2 prints that there's something wrong with them. And so there'd be 2 prints that are trial proofs.
Now, what would it be that would sort of sway you away from those 2 prints? Would it be the quality of the black, or?
Quality of the black, probably over white, probably in this area. Sometimes the plates will physically start to break down in an edition, and that's partially because they're zinc and they're not as hard, but also friction, running through the press, it starts to push down, flatten a bit. So you have to kind of find an intermediate for all of them.
Right.
But they're not going to be 100% the same, because I'm not a machine. I try to act like one, and still things happen. These are actually my children's drawings. So I used to have a studio in John Hammond's house. John Hammond was the first art teacher at Mount Allison, and like back in 1800, whatever, 80 some. And so the kids would come up on Wednesday afternoons after school, because I would have that day off, work in the studio. So I give them paper, and they'd sit and do me drawings. And so this is Christiana, this is Alicia, our oldest, and this is our son Andrew, his drawings. So I've saved those, and so I actually traced them on to the plate so that I had. I've kind of reduced them in size a bit, but so that they would be as true to the source as possible. And then I found this unicorn little statue in the Fine Arts Building someone had left behind. I thought, I'd like to put that on the shelf. And then the figure looking out the window, Lisa, this was actually her niece. And so I thought, I'll have her as if she's drawing on the wall while someone is introspectively looking out at time or place.
How interesting also that the shadow of the light that's flooding through that window, once again adding to that the ghostly light qualities.
Yeah. And then this one, The Loss of a Dream, another drawing by her daughter Christiana. It says, I am a princess. And then this space doesn't make sense perspective-wise. It's going kind of the opposite way, but I wanted that to be an alternative space behind the door. Maybe something that's either being seen or not seen. You know, the two figures kind of interacting at the doorway. And none of us remain princesses. I guess
Or
that's-
queens for that
Or
matter.
queens, yeah, really.